Mr. Smith, and we're going to continue the video lecture of the Nazis and fascism in Germany. Again, this is after World War I, and what we looked at last time were, first of all, what the Weimar Republic was and what the problems of it were. I remember the Weimar Republic had a really complicated government, and it was very difficult to deal with a lot of problems that arose in Germany after World War I, such as just debt, high unemployment, high hyperinflation. All these issues the government had a hard time dealing with, largely because it was complicated and democratic. So you can pause and take a look at the overview of the rest of this video lecture. In discussion of Mussolini and Italy after World War I, we first learned about the word fascism. You can pause the video lecture to review what that means here. But basically, we're talking about rule by a single authoritarian ruler. The government controls the economy and the industry, and maybe most importantly, the government controls the media. So it controls what messages are being promoted to the public. So those who agree, their opinions are reinforced, and those who might disagree with the government, their opinions are really not receiving any kind of reinforcement. So it seems like the messages promoted by the government are the only messages out there. Okay. This also includes extreme militarism, often the idea that war is a really good thing and it shows the strength of a country, and also especially extreme nationalism. So the Italians thought that the Italians were the supreme race, even though Italian is not really a race. So every single country under fascism is trying to promote that they are the greatest country. Okay, so there's extreme nationalism with fascism. So as the Weimar Republic was becoming increasingly ineffective and it was having trouble dealing with these problems, there were originally democratic parties that were starting to lose support because they couldn't really get anything done. Instead, nationalist parties, militaristic parties, and fascist parties like the Nazi Party became more and more popular. Remember, these started off as just having a few seats in the Reichstag, or the Congress of the Weimar Republic. And as the government became less and less effective, these voices became stronger and gained more and more support. So, enter Adolf Hitler. He's born in the Austria-Hungarian Empire, which he was actually born in the section that already spoke German. So he had a lot of Germanic ties. He moved to Germany when he was 3 years old, and the place he moved to was Bavaria. Now, if you were to think of the heartland of, say, the United States, you might think of the middle of the country. Wide open prairies, and or maybe, the Rocky Mountains. It seems like the land stretches on forever. In Germany, the heartland is kind of seen as Bavaria. This is where, this is where people wear lederhosen and, live in the Alps and mountain climb and all those kind of stereotypical German behaviors. Bavaria is kind of the capital of that. So Bavaria is here in the southern part of Germany, which also borders Austria-Hungary. It's kind of the seat of Germanic nationalism, people who strongly support basically Germanic ideas. And as you can see, it's also really beautiful. So the people who live in Bavaria have great pride in Germany and have what you might consider really high nationalism. Hitler grew up in this heartland. He was reinforced, or excuse me, the beauties of Germany were very reinforced within him at a young age, so much so that he even studied art in college and originally wanted to be an artist. That might sound familiar as we studied Mussolini, who wanted to be a journalist. So again, Hitler is, encouraged and interested in promoting ideas. Okay, he served in World War I. He called it the greatest of all experiences. He thought that it was kind of this embodiment of everything good about a nation. Again, similar to what Mussolini thought about war. War, according to Hitler, was where the best of a country was brought out. His commanders thought he was really, really brave. he was even further shocked then when the Treaty of Versailles kind of ended the war, or the armistice ended the war, and Hitler was like many German soldiers kind of shocked because he didn't really realize that Germany was ever losing. So he thought, like many Germans, that somehow the Germans had been stabbed in the back, and the Treaty of Versailles only encouraged that when Germany had to pay for all of the costs of the war. So again, Hitler served in World War I. He was deeply influenced by it, and then he was deeply offended and hurt that Germany, first of all, lost, and second of all, had to pay for the war. In his opinion, Germany hadn't really lost, and somehow somebody had betrayed them. So after World War I, Hitler was deeply interested in nationalist political parties. He joined the Nationalist Socialist Party, which would later become nicknamed the Nazis. This is the Nazi flag, which you might have seen before. If you are looking at the symbols, this is actually a Hindu symbol. The Aryan people, which Hitler considered Germans Aryan peoples, actually come from what is in modern-day India today. And if you were to go to India, you would see a very similar symbol throughout religious temples and really throughout the country. The Germans and the Nazis really took this symbol and kind of made it a Nazi symbol with the white circle and the red background behind it. The Nazis were fascist, racist. They were interested in maintaining the purity of the German people, which might give you an idea of why they disliked Jews and people who were not like the stereotypical German. Hitler helped lead something in 1923. That's the same year that there was all that hyperinflation in Germany, called the Beer Hall Putsch. It basically was he helped lead about 2,000 men to try and take over the government in Munich, which is the capital of Bavaria. And even though they didn't succeed, Hitler got a lot of attention from this. So as the 20s wore on, more and more people started to know who Hitler was and who the Nazis were. Something to just keep in mind, and we'll touch on this more, is that the Nazis promoted this really, really strong German people. You know, that bundle of sticks in fascism. The Nazis thought that the Germans had to be extremely tight and well organized. And to them, the Jews, for instance, were a threat. This is a little complicated to understand. We'll take more time to understand it later. But throughout the 19th century and early 20th century, Jews across Europe were being discriminated against. As all these countries were trying to have these really strong nationalist movements and kind of unite in one government, anyone who was seen as an outsider was kind of shoved to the side or even discriminated against. If you wanted to make a nation of Germans, then what do you do with basically ethnic and religious minorities, for instance, like Jews? To make matters maybe worse was that Jews tended to be well-educated and successful. This is something that has been emphasized in Jewish tradition for a long time, the need to be literate and educated. Also because Jewish families were ostracized from the Catholic Church. In, for instance, like Venice and the early Italian Renaissance days, Jews were the only people that were allowed to handle money. So there was a reputation of Jews being involved with banking, kind of out of necessity, because it was one of the only jobs they could have. So again, Hitler thought that, for instance, they had been stabbed in the back somehow. He was shocked. Somebody like the Jews seemed like a perfect scapegoat. Okay? Oddly enough, the Jews would serve as scapegoats for the Bolsheviks and even for people in France and Britain. Strong nationalist parties always criticize and condemn people who are different than the majority. Okay? Now, what I want to do is just show you a couple clips of Hitler speaking. Just like Mussolini, he was a very energetic and vigorous speaker. He used a lot of rhetoric or language that encouraged Germany as like kind of the supreme country. And he chose to put out messages where you see these big rallies where he looks really, really strong. Okay? So here's Hitler speaking.
Wir wollen einst ein Reich sehen und ihr müsst euch schon dafür ziehen. Wir wollen wollen, dass dieses Volk einst gehorsam ist und ihr müsst euch in den Gehorsam üben. Wir wollen, dass dieses Volk einst friedliebend und aber auch tapfer ist und ihr müsst friedfertig sein. Und ihr müsst deshalb friedfertig sein und mutig zugleich. Und ich weiß, das kann nicht anders sein. Denn ihr seid Fleisch von unserem Fleisch und Blut, von unserem Blut. Und in euren jungen Hirn brennt derselbe Geist, der uns beherrscht. Ihr werdet vergehen, aber in euch wird Deutschland weiterleben. Vor uns liegt Deutschland, in uns und wir Deutschland und hinter uns kommt Deutschland.
Okay, now looking at those speeches a lot later and knowing what Hitler did, we can look at that and think, wow, that is sketchy. But at the time, Germany was again in a very chaotic kind of disorganized state. People were without jobs. People couldn't get enough to eat a lot of times. So somebody this strong, who's very positive seemingly in message, saying, you know, you are the flesh of our flesh. Germany will live on in you. This appealed to people. And if he did say something that was a little crazy every once in a while, for instance, condemning Jews, who were a minority of the population, many Germans, not all, were able to kind of overlook that. Now, there were plenty of people who opposed Hitler, but again, if those are the messages, those speeches, and those clips are that's the video footage that's being promoted by the government, then those who disagree with Hitler have a hard time finding anyone to kind of go along with them. It seems like everybody is supporting Hitler, and this group mentality kind of takes over. Now, again, Hitler, he promised to, restore order in Germany. He encourages pan-German unity, where there would be a German Reich, which means rule, for 1,000 years. Hitler eventually took over because his party, the Nazis, slowly made more and more gains in elections. In 1929, the Great Depression hit. Germany could no longer get loans from the U.S. The economy suffered greatly, and Germany kind of descended almost into chaos. And in 1932, the Nazis won a plurality, not a majority, but they got more votes than any other political party. Hitler became chancellor. And what happened is about less than a year later, there was an arson or fire attack on the Parliament building. And Hitler, as chancellor, said this was a time where he needed to suspend citizen rights and he needed to have the ability to make laws without the consent of Parliament. Basically, he became a dictator. He used this arson attack as an excuse to become dictator. And the people, many people, just went along with it. So, this was the start of the Third Reich, okay? The last thing to keep in mind is that Hitler used youth camps as a way to encourage his message. And we'll talk about this more later, but I want you to pause and read this message that he delivered to basically 14 to 18-year-olds at a Hitler youth camp, okay? Most German kids were required to go to these camps during the summer after Hitler joined. The kind of scary thing about this is that when war broke out, about 5 years later in Germany, the soldiers were the people who had gone to these Hitler youth camps. Okay? We'll spend some more time with this at a later date, but I just want to remind you that fascism depends on controlling the media and controlling the way people think.